Okay, Season 5, Spiritual Spiral Podcast in full swing. I am thrilled you're here. I'm Eddie Cohn, obviously host, creator of the show. Pretty quick episode today. I just finished editing a podcast where I discuss the bear, so that one will probably drop later this week or early next week. And for today, it's funny, I actually recorded a podcast about 4 days ago with this similar theme. And I was listening back over the weekend and I was editing it. Say that 5 times real fast. And I just don't know if my point was being conveyed the way that I wanted it to be made. And then lo and behold, the incident with Donald Trump happened on Sunday. And of course, I couldn't help but take notice to, I guess it was just a reminder about the way news flows, the onslaught of news, the barrage of information. And so it helped me refocus on the point that I wanted to make. So I hit record, and here we go again. Let's give this another try. Of course, I don't want to get into the specifics of it and share my point of view. But I spoke to a friend of mine, and I have to say, I think I'm in this place where I have a lot of friends that are leaning liberal. I have a lot of friends that lean conservative. Then I certainly have a lot of friends that are placed somewhere in the middle. And his response when we talked about it via text, he said, "This is all fantastic theater." And boy, I don't think I could say it better myself. There's this great movie that I highly suggest called Wag the Dog. And it certainly does feel like you couldn't script this all better. In a day and age of dwindling attention spans, boy, it is just a master class. The news has got all the material it needs, all the editing tools, the production teams to do what they can to grasp your attention. It really sort of makes me think about my time and what I spend my free time consuming. And so here's my point. I will never forget the beginning of 2020 in January. We were in Mexico. And this was at the beginning of COVID, and the country had not been shut down yet, but there were rumblings happening online and in print of this virus evolving or coming to the States from China. And I would get a couple texts from family or friends, but I was pretty much completely in the dark because we spent that week in Mexico. We were in Mexico City, and then we were in Tulum. And we were, drinking margaritas on the beach when this tempest of a beast, COVID, was about to rear its ugly head on the United States. And the funny thing is that we land in LAX, and I think maybe 3 or 4 days later, the country is shut down. My point in bringing all this up is, it's amazing how if you're completely isolated from the news cycle, you're completely unaware of what they're trying to get you to think about. And, the world is thinking about COVID and what was about to happen. And I was concerned about my sunburn and what SPF I should be putting on, and should I drink a 3rd or 4th margarita. Now, one could say, boy, that's really ignorant not to, want to know what's going on in the world. But I will say this to you. is it really benefiting your psychological landscape if you are doing nothing but, watching CNN or Fox or reading about what happened with Donald Trump yesterday? If your free time is consumed with all of that, is that necessarily good for your psyche? Is that good for your anxiety levels? Is that good for your sleep? And I remember having dinner a few months ago with a friend, and he posed the question to me, well, what do you think about all the chaos that's going on in the world? And I looked around the restaurant and I said, well, what are you talking about? It doesn't look chaotic in here, does it? He goes, well, no, but have you been reading the news? Have you been hearing all the stories about what's going on? And I just claimed to be a fool. And I said, no, honestly, I've stopped reading about it. Or at least, outside of a couple news articles in the New Yorker that I read, which, I certainly still subscribe to the New Yorker. I love that magazine. Probably more for some of the artistic articles than the topical events that it focuses on. I lean more towards the articles that are fiction based or about the arts. But outside of that, I am just not in the circle of the news anymore. And I think I bring this up also because how is your perspective on the world shaped not by your day-to-day life, but by what you read or see by others? And so often, people will say, oh my gosh, did you read about that? Did you read about that? Or I'm not going to go there because of what happened. Or I'm not going to go there because people are saying this about that place. Or, I'm not going to go to this restaurant because, its Yelp was, 2.5 stars. Or I'm not going to go to this place because I heard this person said that about this person. How much of your decision making, how much of your view on the world is based not on your own actual experience? How much of your opinions, your prejudices are based on what other people say or by what you see in the news? How about your fears, your apprehension to visit Costa Rica or Mexico or to fly to this place? How much of those anxieties are in your psyche, not by anything you experienced, but by what other people experienced or said? I mean, it's to the point now where I just, to my friend's point, he says it's all theater. I mean, it certainly feels like the news cycle, whether you believe it's true, whether you believe it's not true, whether you believe it's inflammatory, it's like it has to be at this frenetic, over-the-top pace or a pace in order for us to remotely give it a moment's notice for us to pay attention. Like if it's not at this insane level, will we even give it a moment's notice? And maybe that's what the news world knows. Like they know that we're so ADD, we're so addicted to our phones, we're addicted to TikTok and Instagram, and God only knows what podcasts we're listening to. Like if the news is boring, will anybody care? And I even, briefly said this on a podcast, I think maybe last season. If something isn't over the top, if something doesn't, take your breath away, or if it's not beautiful or sexy, do we even take notice anymore? Do we even care? Do you feel this pressure to have to be over the top in your day-to-day life to get people's attention? That's sort of another topic. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it just, back to my original point, it feels like, is it actually helping us to pay attention to the news, to pay attention to that cycle of news on YouTube or Instagram or wherever you get your information about the world? Is it worth paying attention anymore? And if somebody's going to say that that's just ignorant not to know what's going on, I almost feel like I'd rather be ignorant. Because it does feel like the world is a beautiful and calm place. Of course, there are some exceptions. Of course, there is violence in the world. I am not naive. But I don't know, how many times out of 10 here in America do you look out your window or go on in your day-to-day life and it's a relatively mundane, peaceful day, and nice people are around you who smile and want to treat you well and treat you with respect? Is that a better indicator of the world, or is what the news media portraying the world, is that a better indicator of what's really going on? And again, I don't know what works for you. I feel like there's a level, there's two points here, and I'll let you go. I don't know if all of this information is good for your psyche. And I also think it feels like this world now has created a new type of addict. That is the person who is addicted to information, constantly consuming, constantly scrolling, trying to get the latest and greatest tweet, the latest news story on this podcast, the latest news story on Fox or CNN, somebody that is constantly sucking up information. Like, at what point is enough? At what point is your cup full? And I want this podcast to inspire more makers, more creators. You know, the world, it feels like it just wants you to keep absorbing, consuming more television shows, watch them as quickly as possible. I was so pissed off that Hulu dropped The Bear, all 10 episodes this third season, all at once. Because they just want people to consume. Keep going. What show's next? What news story's next? I mean, it's just crazy. So ask yourself, as the news stories are going to bombard you over the head over the next week or two, is it actually good to consume all of that information? Does the news actually portray the world as you see it? Or are they sort of reshaping your view or prejudices? Are they creating more anxiety? If you're feeling fearful of trying this or going there, is that based on your own experience? Or is it somebody else's experience? Or is it what you saw on the news? Last little anecdote here. This is embarrassing. This is embarrassing for me to even share this story. But I remember seeing the movie. I was in my 20s. I forget his first name. I think it's Alejandro Inarritu. He's this Mexican filmmaker. And I love his movies. 21 Grams, Babel. His first sort of breakthrough movie was Amores Perros. And it's this trilogy, this 3-hour movie, and it's brilliant. I highly suggest it. The first block of the movie takes place in Mexico City, and it focuses on these young men who fight pit bulls. And it captures Mexico City in this sort of chaotic, frenetic space. It's overwhelming. It feels dirty, and it feels violent, and it feels scary. And I have to say, the first time that I went to Mexico City about 3-4 years ago, I felt that movie like in my psyche. Like, I felt a little anxiety when I was first there in the city and sort of like in the cab going to our apartment. I felt like, is that movie replicating or a fair assessment of what Mexico City is like? And I felt embarrassed that some of the tension, some of the anxiety that I felt was probably because of that movie that I saw like 20 years ago. And again, it makes me ask, how is what we're watching, consuming, how is it shaping our own view of the world? Is your view of the world, are your prejudices, and I'm not even saying that that's a negative. I think we sort of innately have these sort of assumptions about the world sometimes, but are they created by what we're consuming, by what we're viewing, by what other people are saying, or are they created by our own lived experience? I'll leave you with that. It's just something I really think a lot about, how technology and the news, we have our face on our phone all day, we watch the news, we watch these Twitter feeds, and it just is that level of information doing any good to our psychology? Is it relaxing you? Is it really helping us in our day-to-day life? Spiritual Spiral Podcast, Season 5. Thrilled you're here. Thanks for listening. You know where to find me on social at Eddie Cohn or the Spiritual Spiral Podcast. Please share the show with your friends. That's always a really big help. Maybe head to iTunes and give the show a 5-star. Maybe write a review. I would really appreciate that. I can't believe I got through an episode without my cats invading the space. I'll see you soon. As always, thanks so much for listening, supporting, being a part of the Downward Facing Spiritual Spiral Podcast.